You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust.
Am I allowed to remove this microphone for this dad? And I will. Alright, my name is Ian Rogers. I thought I'd just say that just so you don't think there's some random child talking to you. Now you have a name for the face.
Random.
I've been asked to give my platform speech tonight. It's for a platform speaking event called Original Oratory, one where a student writes their own speech and gives a speech to instruct, inform, or otherwise teach people. The speech is supposed to be 10 minutes long. I'm hoping I can give a good 10-minute speech for you guys. So without further ado, I have insatiable needs, and God has limitless resources. How fortuitous is that? Am I right? Now, before you think I'm your typical greedy American teenager, I need to tell you a story. This story is going to focus on two main ideas. The first being my insatiable needs that I mentioned. The second is those insatiable needs, but really how they relate to all of us. But through it all, the point of this speech is to tell you that God is not done giving. It is not his plan to leave you broken. And if you forget anything I say in this speech, just remember that it's not God's plan to leave you broken. In the first chapter of James, he makes a point in saying that all good things come from the Father of lights, God, and that he gives generously to all without reproach. If God is a giver, and I am a needer, then he and I are what you call a match made in heaven. And now for my story. At age 14, I was enjoying a youth camp up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and camp was a blast. But camp was also tough. You may not know this, but I was diagnosed with a congenital muscular disease when I was born, without any cure or really treatments to slow it down. Which means that camp, as fun as it is tough, where each step I take is just much heavier than the last. You may notice that I sometimes shift from foot to foot, and that's because I actually have trouble even holding myself up, because life seems heavy sometimes. And this was no exception for this camp. Every fun thing was always stuck by a hard thing. But there was one more hard thing that I had to deal with this year at camp. I was having trouble breathing. During the week, Wednesday night at 3 a.m., my cabin counselor was worried because I could not fall asleep. Each breath I was taking felt like it was coming through a thin straw. He took me to see the nurse and she told me to drink more water. Well, little did anyone know that water was actually contributing to my problem. On the drive home from this camp, my mother got worried and she put her head on my chest. What she heard was a crackling or a crushing of this cheap water bottle. That sort of sound. She got worried and so she called the ER. But when I stood up to go, I threw up and didn't stop throwing up for the next 2 months. My diagnosis was not pneumonia and it was not bronchitis. My diagnosis was heart failure. My weak heart, my muscle, had failed me. It had grown 3 times its normal size and could not fill or pump blood to my stomach, and so it would purge anything I put into it. It could not pump blood to my lungs, and they were filling with fluids. And it could not pump blood to my legs or my arms, and they were burning at me and almost screaming for oxygen. On the 4th of July, when we usually have the time of celebration, my family was doing anything but. That summer I lived in 3 different hospitals, moved by van, by ambulance, and by a $50,000 helicopter ride from the Children's Hospital Orange County to UCLA. I had a tube in my arm, my wrist, my neck, and after a while, I could not even breathe on my own, and I had a tube down my throat breathing for me. Night after night, the nurse would try to put suction through the tube to clear out all that mucus that was building up, but it simply could not work, and I was constantly gagging and choking and drooling all over myself. I couldn't talk because I had the tube down my throat, and through the haze that had become my consciousness, I could really not even think at all. Sometimes I wrote my feelings on a board, but we realized after many nights that it was just getting worse, and it was just getting harder. These were my insatiable needs that I had. I needed healing. What I needed was a new heart. and I needed a new body. See, if this was the end of the story, if I put the microphone down, and this was the end, and life is bleak, and no one could blame anyone for simply giving up. But as they say in show business, it's never over till the fat lady sings, or in this case, God. See, God had a plan. One morning, I realized this was the end. We couldn't do any more nights on intubation. But my dad had fallen asleep and I couldn't talk to him. So I took a board from my wrist and I threw it over my shoulder. And whether it was sheer chance or God's power, it hit him square in the face. And he knew at once that I needed help. He went to get our nurse Kristen, and she went to see what else we could do. Well, as if in answer to our plea, the head nurse coordinator walked into the room and asked to speak with my dad privately. My dad was worried. He didn't expect good news. He expected to hear that this was the end. He expected to hear, "I'm sorry, there's nothing else we can do for your son. It's time to say goodbye." It was exactly when my dad thought this, when she opened her mouth. And I don't know whether she was a beautiful soprano or not, but what she said could have been music to anybody's ears. She said, "Downstairs in the operating room, there's a heart waiting for your son." And so that's how it happened. September 2016 at 8:30 a.m., they wheeled me downstairs to the operating room, and I was so giddy, I couldn't talk, but I was giving a thumbs up to everything and everyone around me. That was God's plan. There was no middle point. There was no point where we said, "We're done, we're giving up," because God didn't give up. God had that plan. As Paul pleaded in 2 Corinthians 12:9, he said, "God, take this thorn from me." He said that 3 times. But God said, "My grace, my strength is perfected in your weakness." And that's what we realized. We realized that God's power is even better than this present suffering that we had. Now, before you think that my story is so far-fetched, so amazing that you can't possibly relate, I need to tell you something. We haven't lived by each other our entire lives. But I'm pretty sure it's not too hard to say life is tough. We wake up in the morning and there are physical ailments, but there's other ailments that we all can identify with. Things that we have to do that are due, a deadline. There's places we have to take our children. We might be late. We might not be late. There's bills to pay, taxes to pay, payments for our car, all sorts of things to pay for. There's all sorts of relationships that we have that get broken, and they really weigh on us and make your life seem heavy. Life has a way of taking all of our efforts and shoving them down our own throats and becoming a burden. Remember how I said I could barely hold myself up? We've all felt times where we've said, "I can't even hold my own life up." Maybe you can't even relate to any of that. But during this past year, maybe you've had to hold your grandparents' or your parents' hand for the very last time. Maybe that's where you're coming from. Maybe that's that reminder that this life here is broken. But I'm here to say that it's not God's plan to leave you in this life, in this time, in the broken places. God promised in Revelation 21:5, he says, "Behold, I am making all things new." He's not done yet. God's like a crazy painter. Have you ever seen a masterpiece painting? It's ugly when it's only halfway finished. That's because it's not finished yet. It is being painted. God is giving. All of these things God is saying when he says that he is making all things new. He's promising that this is not the end of the story, that he is not planning to leave you broken. I have come to grips with the fact that this life I lead here is not going to be beautiful. But only God can take something that's not beautiful and make it beautiful. He promised to us that when we get to heaven, we'll be able to run and jump. And maybe you haven't looked forward to running and jumping, but I have. Maybe you looked forward to something else. Maybe you have a burden that God says he'll take away. He will. Maybe you have a tough heart. God says he will take that away too. Because we all have insatiable needs. Needs of healing, needs of a new heart, and needs of a new body. And God says, I will make it all new. All these things are promised. But our hearts will melt, and our tears will be wiped away, and our hands will be held by Jesus, and he'll never let go. How fortuitous is that? Thank you. Hello, family. They just announced semifinals. I happened to be in there because apparently God is not done with my story and with me. I'm so thankful that all of you guys were praying. I'm so thankful I have such a great support team back home. I just don't want to forget about everything the Lord has done in bringing me to this place where people are forced to hear about how good he is.
And they have to really think about it.
And apparently God is good enough that he reaches people's hearts. I don't understand. I've never even imagined I could do something nationally, and I'm so astounded by how good he is. God is good. One day, he will take all of our lives and make them beautiful. We can put our hope in God, for God is not done giving yet. Thank you.
All around, hope is spreading.